Welcome back, everybody, to the Enterprise Web App Pattern series of videos. We are going to hit on our very last pattern, our very last pillar, and that's performance efficiency. So what are we talking about when we're talking about performance efficiency? Really, it comes down to the ability of a workload to scale to meet the demands in an efficient manner. Now, we're going to jump right into it, and we're going to talk about something called the cache-aside pattern, right? And so the cache-aside pattern is a coding pattern, something that we would implement when we sit down and we write our code. And it's all about the ability to performance optimize our pattern. That's one of the things that it does. And it really, what it does, it sits in between our database and our web app. And so when we have our data and we want to get at it quick, we don't want to be hitting our web app or our database all the time, right? That could be slower. So if we can, let's put a cache in there. And so then that cache, we can just retrieve from that, and it's going to be faster. And so we're going to put data in there that doesn't change a whole lot. But if it does change, that we're going to have to take on the ways to manage that changing and make sure our cache stays consistent. So the cache-aside pattern is a way to improve the consistency and maintain the consistency across the whole database. And it also improves speed quite a bit. And it's a way also to manage the costs of our overall. So we're not transacting against our database quite as often, that we just hit the cache itself. So that is the performance efficiency pattern I want to talk about. And let's actually go in and show it. What we have up and running, of course, is our ProSwear training application. And so we can go in and we can see that it is relatively and pretty snappy pulling back videos. But there's only a certain amount of videos that we have here. But we want to pull it all back from cache regardless. And so we have set up here an Azure cache for Redis to do so. And if I look inside that Azure Redis cache, I can see everything that I have in here right now, all the keys that I have set up. So there's over 900 different ones in there, quite a bit. But let's check out on how things actually get put in there. So I go through and I look at my code and look at the dependencies. One thing I get with the Spring Boot right here is the Spring Boot starter data Redis. All right, so Azure Cache for Redis works with the data, with the regular Redis stuff as well. So cool. I get that. And then in my application properties, when I'm setting everything up, all I need to do is set up the password to it to make sure everything's set up, and then using it. This is really simple to use. I just have to decide which data I want to put into the cache and what not. So when I'm going ahead and getting things like getting my playlist out from the database, you know what? I'm going to want to put that into my cache. So I'm going to say put this into the playlist cache and just call it cacheable. That's all we're doing right here. Same thing here. Playlist users cache, that's cacheable. Put it into the cache. If I want to evict something from the cache, so right here, I'm adding a playlist user. So what happens here when I'm starting to add something, this is where I have to make sure that I want to keep my cache up to date. And so I want to, when I'm putting something into the cache, it might not be, my cache is no longer up to date everywhere. So I want to evict the cache and make sure this new user goes in, and then the cache is cleared out, and then it can be rebuilt. And so that's what this cache evict does. And so that's all I have to do is put this up here, and then it works. Playlist user cache, cache evict, and then when I can go down back here to my playlist user cache and grab it, things work again. Right there. So that's really all there is to it. There's cacheable and cache evict. And cache evict working with things where the cache changes, you want to cache evict, and just cacheable when you're pulling things back and you want to push them in to the cache. All right. And as I mentioned before, when things are into the cache, they will return faster. But since there's not a whole lot of data that we have here, things return pretty fast to begin with. But we could take a peek here if I can find something that's in the cache that's for us. Or actually what I'll do is I'll just do a flush all. And so everything should be out of the cache for the most part. Just a couple values in here. So then I will get back into my app, log back in. And you can see a backup, more values into the cache. And let's do a get media file ID cache. Like that. And if I scroll all the way down, you can see what's in the actual cache. Great. And that's all there is to implementing the cache aside pattern using the Spring Boot starter data Redis. So I'm just saying either cache evict when my playlist changes, or my cache, what I want to have in the cache changes, or cacheable when I want to put stuff coming back from the database into the cache. All right, so there's another thing that we can do to help speed up performance, and that's database performance. And one of the things that we can help with there are testing network hops, right? Overall, if we have a lot of network hops between our database and our web app, things could get slowed down, right? So we want to make sure we can minimize those. And so one of the things that we do when we go from on-prem to the cloud is that we want to establish a performance baseline first. So establish that on-prem first. How fast are things? And so then when we move it to the cloud, we can compare how fast it is between our web app and the database in Azure versus on-prem. And we can do that using application insights and see how things react. And then another great tip is to use connection pools always whenever we can to make things faster as well. So those are just some database performance, real quick tips to use to make sure that your database is reacting faster or as fast as it can. Again, we can go through all the code at aka.ms/eap/rwa/java to get full details of what we just talked about. And overall, for the reliable web app pattern itself, we just talked about 5 different pillars, ranging from reliability to keeping your app resilient and available whenever disaster might strike, making sure that it's always available just in case something breaks on when you're calling a web API or something like that. Make sure your users can always hit your application. Security, keeping your app's data confidential and secure and making sure your data still has the integrity to it. To cost optimization, choosing the right resources for the right job. And operational excellence, making sure you have repeatable infrastructure, like for your infrastructure of code, using Terraform files. That way you can repeatably and reliably deploy your Azure resources and deploy the code to those. And then we just looked at performance efficiency. Specifically, we looked at the cache aside pattern and how to implement that using the Spring Boot starter. So all those put together is the reliable web app pattern. Now, as I mentioned before, those are based off of the Azure Well-Architected Framework. Now, the Azure Well-Architected Framework is a whole lot more than this, but we took these 5 pillars based off of customer engagements. People are very successful using these, and we formalized them into this reliable web app pattern, a pattern of patterns, and put them into these 5 pillars. And they're also based off of the 12-factor app methodology. So, of course, please go out and get the code and learn all about it at aka.ms/eap/rwa and /Java to get the code, They get the documentation, get the application, the ProSquare application that you can deploy. It's ready to go. It's fully production ready if you wanted it to be. Up to you what you want to do with it, but you can see all the design decisions that were made, and there's explanations why they were made, and it's ready to go for you to learn from. So thank you very much for joining me on this reliable web app pattern journey. My name is Matt Sokup, and I can't wait to see what you build knowing the reliable web app pattern.